And we are thrilled on behalf of all of the ERGs to welcome you to our first signature event of 2020, our speaker series entitled Celebrating Intersectionality. Could I ask that everyone in the room please indicate to me in whichever way they're most comfortable, how many of you feel that you have a really solid understanding of what intersectionality is? Okay. We've got some hands held high, we've got some shaking. Looks like about half the room responded in a way where at least we start to understand, we begin to understand what it is. So for those who may not be familiar, very high level, essentially it's a framework for understanding how multiple aspects of our personal lives, our race, gender, ethnicity, social class, etc., come together and create unique and overlapping modes of both injustice and discrimination. If you have 20 minutes on your commute home today, I would highly recommend that you look up Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk entitled The Urgency of Intersectionality. But today, we are not here for a deep dive or lecture. We are here to hear some awesome stories. So over the next hour, you'll be hearing from 3 incredible humans, beautiful storytellers, and lucky for us, members of the Fidelity family and active members of our resource groups. I want to jump right into their bios and give them a chance to tell their stories to you, and in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. So first up, we'll hear from Rahul Nair. Rahul is a Renaissance man by multiple labels. He's an ad man, a journalist, a technologist, a technocrat, an IT manager, a SME, a Mumbakar, a New Yorker, a Virginian, and a Bostonian. But deep in his heart, he is just a disgruntled ex-cricket journalist who still dreams of following the games around the world and being a roving cricket reporter. Without further ado, I turn it over to Rahul Nair.
Thank you, Katie. That was very kind. I think we kind of have the similar start. So before I begin, by a quick show of hands, how many of you here have heard the word intersectionality and know exactly what it means? Oh, great. So I don't have to feel bad, because let me be honest and confess that I had never ever heard the word intersectionality. I never knew what it meant. Never ever heard of Kimberly Crenshaw and her wonderful work. I happened to hear the word at a water cooler conversation and asked my humanities professor what it meant. And she told me that intersectionality recognizes that identity markers, for example, female or black, do not exist independently of one another. In fact, they inform each other and create this complex convergence of oppression. Now, this textbook definition kind of made sense, but not really. It was like one of those things that you could read about, but it's hard to wrap your head around. And then I had a moment that made me think about identity and its ramifications far more deeply than I ever had. It was March last year, around the same time, and I remember it was spring break from business school. I was on spring break from business school, and I was desperately trying to catch up on all my final assignments. Being a Friday afternoon, I left a little early from work, and as I was walking towards the train station, I got a call from my brother, and he told me, hey, mom's in the hospital, she's in the ICU, and things don't look good. Between my getting on the train at South Station and getting off of it at Alewife, and all the dead pockets of cell reception in between, a few of those dreaded instant messages had trickled onto my phone that informed me that, yes, mom was indeed no longer amidst us. So I got off the train, feeling quite numb, walked over to my car, called my boss, drove home, logged onto my computer, and immediately started scouring all the websites or travel websites for the first ticket to Mumbai. And my phone was right there, and messages were going back and forth between my 2 brothers and I as to whether I would make it to the funeral or not in time. And all of a sudden it hit me. Hey, I couldn't just pack my bags and leave. just a few months ago, I had taken the oath of allegiance and renounced my Indian passport. I now needed a visa to go to Mumbai, and it was Friday evening. So in one fell swoop, I had experienced both privilege and deprivation in the same instant. So I pondered on this a lot on my long flights to and from Mumbai. And I began to feel that while identity can be contextual, it is critical in defining one's life experience. And when identities overlap, the experience becomes even more complex and nuanced. As my brother put it, intersectionality is like a double or even triple whammy, like being gay and Muslim and an immigrant all at the same time. And I then began to think about the various movements around the world in Syria, Venezuela, that are dealing with overlapping oppression at multiple levels and dimensions. And I felt that understanding intersectionality is critical to combating the interwoven prejudices that one faces in everyday life. And taking this a step further, I felt an intersectional look at how groups that are marginalized by, an intersectional look at how immigrants practiced citizenship could give us key insights into how groups marginalized by race, gender, ethnicity, and other social forces build and sustain communities of resistance and transformation towards social justice. So my community, the Indian American community, or the Desi community as I call it, Desi being the Hindi word for a person from the Indian subcontinent. So my community, the Desi community, is one of the fastest growing immigrant communities in America. Today, almost 4.5 million individuals are either from India or report Indian ancestry or race. When people meet me for the first time, they always ask me, hey, where are you from? And when I tell them where I live in greater Boston, they always follow up with, no, tell us where you're really from. And it is this sense of not belonging, of not having an identity or franchise that stings. And so the question becomes, do I feel American enough? Do I feel Indian enough? Or neither? For most immigrants, including Indian Americans, racial, ethnic, and social relationships keep getting reshaped as men and women adapt to life in a foreign land. Being a woman, especially an Indian wife, living at home in America, carries with it its own poignantly interlocked oppressions. She is discriminated against at home because Indians, or Indian males, are traditionally highly patriarchal. She's also socially discriminated against because her legal status is completely tied to her husband's. In effect, she becomes an illegal alien if she were to leave her unhappy home. And if she were plucky enough and lucky enough to find a job, well, then she has to deal with racial and gender discrimination at work. So who speaks for these silent sufferers without suffrage? Nobody. In our elite circles, all we hear about are the Sundar Pichais, the Satya Nadellas, the Shantanu Narayans, and all those successful faces of Indian immigration. Nobody ever hears about that Punjabi truck driver in California who has to settle for lower wages or no health care or risk losing his job. Which brings me to a much less known statistic about unauthorized Indian immigration being one of the fastest growing segments within all unauthorized immigration. It has increased by almost 914% since 1990, and that's a huge number. And the oppression that this segment faces is even more dire because nobody talks about it. When I was on an H-1B visa and awaiting my green card that was being processed, there were many years that I spent without a raise or a bonus because for all intents and purposes, I was like a bonded laborer. But all that pales in comparison when you hear some of the horror stories that these undocumented immigrants have to go through. Maybe many of you have heard of that story about the Indian Deputy Consul General in New York who was arrested on charges of human trafficking. She had apparently falsified her Indian nanny's visa papers by claiming that she would pay her $4,500 a month in wages, when in reality, she paid her $3 an hour for 17, 18, 19 hours of work every day. And when she was arrested, she pulled some strings with the Indian Foreign Ministry and got posted to the United Nations, which granted her diplomatic immunity. And I think a year before that, there was another Indian diplomat in New York, and I don't know what it is with Indian diplomats in New York, but that's a different story. There was another Indian diplomat who was charged with bringing over an underage girl as a domestic servant. And she was subjected to pretty barbaric treatment, like they had taken away her passport, confined her into that Manhattan apartment, and made her do all kinds of menial labor. But the sad thing is, nobody really cares about these stories or the hundreds of others that go completely unreported, because these don't concern white women. These are not American citizens, just the flotsam and jetsam of society. In New Jersey, there is a law that when you go to the gas station, you cannot self-service your car. An attendant has to come and pump gas into your vehicle. And so many of the gas stations, they hire undocumented immigrants, including Indian Americans, to do this job. And these guys, they work in abject conditions, pumping gas in pouring rain, in snow, and they live in squalor and poverty because they're paid a pittance. And I still remember, after 9/11, an Indian pump jockey, I read about an Indian pump jockey getting shot to death in Arizona because it was a race attack, but it was uninformed because he was a Sikh. And Sikhs grow their beards long and wear turbans just like Muslims do. But all this is not really new. Way back in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his treatise, The Souls of Black Folk, had written that oppression does indeed operate in complicated, interlocked ways. And reflecting on this harsh truth and recognizing that every individual experience of identity is valid is how intersectionality helps change our perceptions. Using identity as one of the many lenses to view our world more clearly is what makes intersectionality this powerful framework that it is. And a useful way of expanding on this would be to examine, say, how discrimination works in different cultures. And I could start this conversation off by answering the question that a lot of people ask me when they find out what religion I am. When I tell them that I'm a Hindu, the most common follow-up question is about the caste system. Now, the caste system, which is one of the world's oldest surviving forms of social stratification, plays a significant role in determining oppression or privilege back in India. Despite affirmative action and the constitutional ban on discrimination, the ground reality is quite different. The caste that you're born into pretty much defines your entire social status, your family ties, the person you get married to, your cultural traditions, your access to economic and educational opportunities. And this is especially true in the small towns and villages in which over 70% of Indians live. More than a third of the Dalits, the lowest caste people, live on less than $2 a day and have little or no access to running water. They perform the most menial of tasks, like cleaning the sewers and the gutters. And you'll rarely find one in a white-collar job. Hate crimes against Dalits have increased in recent times. And another very interesting divide that you will notice is the one between the rural and the urban educated elite in India, with the latter having co-opted all political and social thought leadership for the greater good. And now this variance can be observed in our Indian American community here, with the successful immigrants being the higher caste, urban educated elite, and the undocumented DACA dreamers being the lower caste, working class proletariat. Another discrimination, quite subtle and also banned under the Indian Constitution, that you would notice has got to do with colorism, the color of your skin. It's not coincidental that some of the most popular Bollywood heroines and celebrities are much fairer than the average Indian. There's a clear bias towards the fairer skin tone. Dark-skinned heroes and heroines do not sell. The mental models are so deep-rooted that Unilever actually has a product called Fair and Lovely, which is a skin-lightening cosmetic that promises users fairness of skin and loveliness of personality. And it is so successful that it has commandeered almost 50% of market share in what is a $500 million market. And I could go on and on with other examples. But I think what would be really useful is to take a step back and look at all these stories, all these experiences framed through intersectionality. You know, intersectionality becomes that organizing principle that ensures that one marginality is not substituted for another. And that lived experiences are not treated as generic and undifferentiated. Mapping the fractured nature of the everyday allows us to be open to competing interpretations. And it is this framework that enables truly intersectional thinkers to be highly attentive to the points of view of different people suffering from different oppressions. It is what enables these leaders to want everyone to have their say, to treat everyone else, to compare everyone else's views to their own. To borrow from standpoint theory, the real value here is that the perspectives of the marginalized and the oppressed can help create truly objective narratives of the world around us. Through the outsider within phenomenon, these individuals are in the unique position to be able to point to those patterns of behavior that we who are immersed in the dominant group culture are unable to recognize. Intersectionality gives voice to these marginalized groups by helping them to challenge the status quo as the outsider within. And in the process, help members of the dominant group culture to learn that a vast majority of African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, socioeconomically disadvantaged Americans, immigrants, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, even the non-cognitive elites for that matter, can hold contrary, differing views on how power and language work. You know, every one of us here is a leader. And we lead through deeds, not words. We deliver hope through the magic of everyday life. It is up to us to embrace intersectionality and help build an inclusive fidelity, a truly inclusive one, in which the rainbow flag of a fidelity pride can cut across boundaries and co-opt Holi, the Hindu festival of colors, as their own. Or a WLG can become the greatest ally of enable and aspire. To paraphrase social scientist John Jeremier, if our desire is to truly heal the world, then we ought to know more about how the core mechanisms of the world work and how things can be changed by adopting the standpoints of those people who suffer its wounds the most. So let us get there as quickly and as gracefully as we can. with empathy, with openness, with humility, and most importantly, with love. Thank you very much. That's my time. Thank you. Thank you.
So today we heard some stories of personal experience, of experiences in families, of experiences in communities, some stories of struggles, some stories of triumphs, and we've learned that some of these intersections are constructed just to hold us back, while others, when fully embraced, can actually help propel us and our neighbors forward. From all of this, one thing is certain though, we are not one-dimensional. As humans, we do not fit squarely into any one box. There are so many different puzzle pieces that create the unique and intricate and beautiful selves that we all are. Our hope is that you walk away today understanding that by recognizing our own intersections, learning about the intersections of others, celebrating our whole multi-dimensional selves, we can learn to embrace all of our differences, all of our sets of experiences, and use that to help us foster collaboration, to drive innovation, and most importantly, to inspire kindness. Thank you so much for being here today. And we do have to wrap our conference, our D&I conference, so we would ask that for any of the guests who joined us in the room today, please respectfully exit through the front doors so that we can get everyone on the road home safely. Thank you so much.